Good afternoon. I'm Karan Bilamoria, proud to be president of the CBI, and it's wonderful to be here in Birmingham today at Advance's offices for our first on-the-road pan-UK annual conference. 3 days, several locations, 25 sessions, 67 speakers. And Advance, thank you so much for hosting us. You're a dynamic UK software business with over 2,700 employees around the world, providing mission-critical enterprise and market-focused software. Just last week, the CBI had our Midlands annual dinner, and last month, I visited the region and hosted our first face-to-face dinner with businesses from all sectors and sizes. And I want to thank our regional director, Rick Blackmore, and his wonderful team, including Hannah, for all the help in organizing today. So diversity is what this region is all about. Cities, famous cities like Birmingham, where we are, and Coventry, and Leicester, and Nottingham, and rural communities, but also the different types of businesses and sectors, from manufacturing and automotive to hospitality, and of course, our fantastic universities. And I'm very proud that for 7 years, I've been Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, where my mother studied, and my grandfather studied, and my uncle studied. So I'm following in the family tradition. As well as the huge diversity, the Midlands has enormous opportunity looking ahead. Our global profile is just being raised day by day. We've had Coventry, City of Culture in 2021, and next year we've got the Commonwealth Games, the Birmingham Commonwealth Games 2022, and the university is going to be playing a major part in that with hockey and squash and the Athletes' Village, the majority of it taking place. And the baton relay is going on around the world to 74 territories and countries of the Commonwealth, and we'll be in India in January, and I'll be there with the baton in India. And when it comes to laying the foundations of UK's competitiveness, the Midlands is right there in the mix, ready to lead the way. On trade, the Midlands is already responsible for 22% of England's exports, the greatest share of any region. The growth in inward investment here is beating that of the rest of the UK, hands down. And on innovation, skills, and inclusion, the Midlands has the knowledge, the experience, and the potential to take both its established and emerging clusters of expertise in automotive, tech, energy, health, from good to truly great. And by the way, I can vouch for this. I was at COP26 for 1.5 weeks out of the 2 weeks, and the highlight of my visit was chairing a meeting on the world's first retrofitted hydrogen-powered train, Hydroflex. And that was developed by the University of Birmingham, starting as a student research project in 2012, and now a world first, but in collaboration with Porterbrook, the rolling stock company, and Innovate UK, the government's finance. A real collaboration between government, academia, and business to be a world's first from Birmingham right here. So today, it is my great pleasure to announce one of our keynote speakers of the CBI conference, the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, MP. He qualified at the bar, had a distinguished career as a lawyer, including 5 years as the Director of Public Prosecutions. He was elected to the House of Commons in 2015, very quickly promoted to the Labour's front bench, Shadow Immigration Minister, then 3.5 years as Shadow Brexit Secretary, and since April last year, he has served as leader of the Labour Party. It's been a privilege for me to have known Keir for many years, well before his current role, and the relationship between business and the Labour Party has, without exaggeration, gone from strength to strength. Labour's ambitions to decarbonise the economy, build a better future for everyone through improving education are shared by business. Lifelong learning is the bedrock of productivity, growth, and in turn, rising wages. Commitments on R&D spending, investment, and digital skills signal an understanding of core business priorities essential for delivering a dynamic and future-focused economy. So, Keir, I really enjoyed my visit to your annual conference in Brighton earlier this year, and thank you and your party for your hospitality to the business community. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome you today to our annual conference. Ladies and gentlemen, Leader of the Labour Party, the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, MP.
Thank you so much, Lord Bellamoria, and good afternoon to everybody in the room. It's really fantastic to be here, to see so many of you in the flesh, and after 18 months of living in a virtual world, I'm really liking the idea of giving speeches to live audiences, so really, really fantastic to see you. My message for today to you is clear. As I said in my conference speech, the Labour Party conference speech, Labour is back in business. The dual meaning of this is entirely deliberate. We are, and we always were, the party of work. Founded in the workplace, we're the party of working people. And that means that Labour is also the party of business. The first annual report of the CBI, back in 1965, made a point that I think still stands today. The whole future of Britain, it reported, rests on the success of industry. Industry must be dynamic, competitive and profitable to compete in an ever-increasingly competitive world. Those words, half a century ago, could have been written yesterday. Britain is not as dynamic, as competitive and profitable as we need to be. And today I want to discuss how we can create a contract together to put that right. In a way, we've always been bound together, the Labour Party and the CBI. The CBI was founded, at least in part, as a response to a Labour government. Your commemorative book, many of you will have seen that commemorative book, called the CBI, 50 Years of Business Innovation, notes that the radical policies of the Wilson government resulted in sharply divided tactics amongst your members. Today, I want to give you a flavour of a future radical Labour government that will not provoke division. Because if you get above the political fray and survey the British economy over a longer time frame, we have a familiar and a persistent problem. We still haven't cracked productivity. Now, I heard what the Prime Minister said this morning, but I'm afraid that even before the pandemic, Britain went through the worst decade of productivity growth since the Industrial Revolution. The worst decade. Now, that is staggering. Now, of course, the government has its own answer to the productivity problem. He's called Geoffrey Cox. But we might need a little bit more than that. Now, it's not as if we don't know the answer. We need increased business investment and better capital stock and improved infrastructure. We need to embrace new technology. We need to lift our export performance. We need cities outside of the southeast to become economic powerhouses, which is why it was so devastating to see the government rip up its promises in relation to HS2 and the Northern Powerhouse Rail. These are not just train lines. They're lifelines for businesses and commuters. And it's not just a betrayal of the North, it's a betrayal of the economic potential of those regions, denying them the growth that your Director General, Tony Danker, has championed so effectively, including in his speech this morning. And if we're really serious about improving productivity, then most of all, we need to invest in our people to ensure they have the skills that are right for the modern economy. After the pandemic and after Brexit, We need a national reset. The business community and the political world need to work together. We both have a job to do. That job is to remake Britain. And that means remaking Britain's economy so that it's fit for purpose and fit for the future. Now, relations between politics and business have not always been warm. The Prime Minister himself has not exactly been complimentary. I can promise you that the only F words I will be using are foreign investment, fair trade, fiscal policy and fiduciary duty. I know that we have bridges to build. And I want to start that dialogue with you today. I want to start that conversation by thanking you for the part you've played, especially in the last 18 months, where your incredible resilience and hard work helped protect livelihoods and communities. Your leadership made a real difference. And I think, and I'm sure you share this, that the reputation of our businesses has been enhanced by what you've done in the last 18 months, 2 years. So let me describe how I see my side of the contract. Getting our economy to grow, getting to grips with the problem of productivity, and giving business a generation of young people ready for work. Any contract, of course, needs to be based on stability in tax policy, in regulation, and the terms of trade. You want as much certainty as you can get. You want independent institutions, treaties that are respected, contracts that are enforced. After COVID and Brexit, our public finances are in a fragile state. In her recent speech, Rachel Reeves, my brilliant Shadow Chancellor, made her commitment to fiscal discipline abundantly clear. Our 5 fiscal rules made it plain that we will never spend money just for the sake of it. We really don't think that the solution to every problem is to throw cash at it. And just as every one of you scrutinises the cost side of your business, constantly asking if investments are paying off, we'll do the same on behalf of the tax-paying public. The problem we face today is that we have no industrial strategy, no business plan. The budget, the recent budget, was an opportunity to address that and remake Britain. But it was an opportunity that was missed. In Tony Danker's own words, he said it isn't bold enough to deliver the high investment, high productivity economy the government seeks. I think putting a cap on investment, as the government has, is a false economy. It's a cap on ambition and a cap on productivity. And there's nothing that suggests a government getting to grips with the scale of the challenge. And you can see all around what happens when a government has no plan. It's happening now. Prices going up. Energy getting more expensive. Taxes rising £3,000 more per household by 2026. £3,000. And with the effects of Brexit and COVID working together, a shortage of labour. And the really irritating thing about this is it was all so predictable. Lord Bilimoria himself warned, I think, in June about the perfect storm of economic problems that was brewing. He pointed, I think, to HGV and to the drivers, as well as butchers, brewers and welders. It's the same in professional services and the same in manufacturing. This is, in part, about Brexit, because the government thinks all it has to do is say the words, get Brexit done. It has absolutely no plan to make Brexit work. And let me be clear. Labour is not planning a rematch. Brexit has happened, and we're not going to rejoin. But it's obvious that a poorly thought-through Brexit is holding Britain back. It's astonishing to see a government that negotiated a treaty now complaining that the deal they signed doesn't work. Wait till the Prime Minister finds out who negotiated the Northern Ireland Protocol. I wish he would stop picking fights for the sake of it and just get on with it. Labour will work with you with business on this. We should carry out a transparent and honest analysis together of all the holes in the Prime Minister's deal. We need to work out how we can fill them, and fast, without the risk of trade wars, without erecting further barriers to cooperation with our allies, and without the need for even more years of painful negotiations. Now, of course, decisions that have been made must be respected, and negotiations will be tough. And this is a message to both sides of the Channel. We all have a duty to make Brexit work. So bear with me as I give you some concrete examples of what we would do. We would negotiate a new veterinary agreement for trade in agri-products. Now, this would have two benefits. First, it would help to get through the impasse over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Second, it would cut red tape and barriers for exporters across the United Kingdom. Labour would also look to find an agreement on mutual recognition of conformity assessments across all sectors. That would mean that our producers would no longer have to complete two sets of tests. There would be no need for two certification processes to sell goods in both the UK and the EU. We would also seek regulatory equivalence for financial services and mutual recognition of professional qualifications, because we absolutely recognise the importance of looking after our world-class financial and professional service businesses. We would also seek to maintain Britain's data adequacy status. That would mean that our data protection rules would continue to be deemed equivalent to those in the EU, which would, in turn, make UK digital services companies more competitive. And finally, we would seek a better long-term deal for UK hauliers to ease the supply chain problems we're seeing. Now, this is a plan that follows closely what many of you have told me is needed to move us towards the closer trading arrangement that we need with the EU. I believe that all of this is achievable by robustly defending our interests and patiently negotiating. But you will all know this. There's one further element: leadership. Trust matters in international negotiations. But with this Prime Minister, that ingredient is missing. Instead, what do we get? We get a series of pantomime disputes, which is no good for British business, nor for the British public, and no help at all as we tackle the task of remaking Britain. So let me come to where the government most needs to keep its side of the contract, to ensure that our people get the skills that they need. The battle for talent will be one of the defining issues of the 21st century. As I travel around the country talking to businesses, I'm constantly struck by how often I'm told about the skills shortages. A recent survey I saw showed that 80% of businesses were worried about skills. The world has changed, you know this. The demand of skills has changed. Business leaders tell me that the skills we need today to be more productive are critical thinking, creativity, communication, and the ability to work in a team. And it's long been my view that we just don't value technical and vocational skills nearly enough. So it's no wonder that this country does much worse in computer skills than our economic rivals. No wonder that fewer than half of employers believe young people have the digital skills required. Think of all the students that we effectively abandon at the age of 18. 40% leave education without essential qualifications. 40%. A lot of these students could really flourish if they received a high-quality technical training. Yet, funding per student in further education and sixth form colleges has fallen by 11% in real terms since 2010. And that's why today I'm announcing my new Council of Skills Advisors. David Blunkett, working along with the tech entrepreneur Praful Nargund and the skills expert Rachel Sanby-Thomas, to recommend the change we need to ensure everyone leaves education job-ready and life-ready. My council will explore how to ensure that young people are literate in the technology of the day. That's why we would add digital skills to the basics of reading, writing and arithmetic. That's how seriously we take digital skills. And I also want my council to advise me on how we can lift the sights of all pupils. We must encourage their ambition and be more ambitious for them. In my own constituency, there's a wonderful school, primary school, called Rill Primary School, which runs a great programme called Raising Aspirations. Employers like Mercedes, Derwent, Google, the Ritz, the Crick Institute inspire the children to think about the jobs they might do, jobs they might never have considered before or even heard of. Just recently, the kids met Lewis Hamilton to learn about engineering, where we have a significant skills shortage. I can't tell you what a difference this kind of thing does. Better skills are vital if we're to improve productivity and economic growth. That's why getting the next generation ready for work will be my mission as leader of the Labour Party. So, skills policy is the first line in the first chapter of Labour's plan for good business. It's a plan that I want you all to be part of. It's a plan that will include a policy for start-ups. We would create 100,000 new businesses over the next 5 years by boosting the start-up loan scheme. And let me turn to business rates, because we know we can't achieve the investment we need if the tax burden is not fair. The Conservatives promised fundamental reform of business rates 4 times, and each time all we got was tinkering around the edges. Well, Labour will not just walk around the problem. We will scrap and we will replace business rates with a much fairer alternative to incentivise investment. And we want public bodies to give more contracts to British firms. Those contracts will raise social and environmental standards. Our buy, make and sell more in Britain policy will weigh not just the cost and quality of a contract, but also the value that it brings to our communities. Make it here. That is how we will remake Britain. Now, we're meeting here a week or so after the limited progress made at COP26 in Glasgow. It's obvious we need to do more if we're to protect our planet. That is our solemn duty. But when I think of the climate crisis, I don't just think of a duty, I think of a huge opportunity. Like Joe Biden, when I think climate crisis, I think jobs. If we invest in manufacturing electrical vehicles, if we increase investment in our ports and finally turn our world-leading status in offshore wind into jobs, then the future can be green, fair and prosperous. That is why Labour is committed to the investment needed. Our climate investment pledge amounts to £28 billion a year until 2030. We would commit £6 billion over a decade to upgrade every home that needs it. That creates about 500,000 jobs. In the workplace, we would help fund the investment in the gigafactories we need for electric car manufacturing. What we need now is a sector-by-sector plan for the car industry, for the steel industry, for all industry. Our competitors are already doing this, and we can't afford not to. So that's our side of the contract, to run a stable government and a tight ship, to equip the next generation for work, to invest in British business, and to create a wave of high-skilled jobs. Of course, on your side of the contract, there are responsibilities too. To invest in the long term rather than the short term, to contribute as we strive towards net zero, to contribute to your local communities, which I know many of you are doing, to support your workforce with fair pay and flexible working. When I was reflecting on this opportunity to speak to you today, I thought of my dad. He was a skilled industrial worker, a toolmaker in a factory. And the thing I remember from my dad most of all is how hard he worked, his industry. Now, your organisation and mine both have a synonym for work in our titles: industry and labour. That is why we must work together to remake Britain for the future. Our mutual interest, our shared passion, to use the full potential of our nation, to maximise the contribution we can all make. The next government will inherit a big job to get Britain fit for the future. I'm looking forward to working with you to remake Britain. Thank you very much. Now, I think we're going to take questions, and if this works, we're going to Helen Ann Smith at Sky virtually first. Helen, I can see you. I hope you can hear me, and can we come to you first? Thank you.
I can, thank you. Helen Ann Smith, Sky News. You say you want to be seen as a fiscally responsible party, that you don't want to be seen as solving problems by simply throwing money at them, but you simultaneously want to fund HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail as per the original very expensive plans. And today, your criticism of the government's social care cap would also cost significantly more. So are you not guilty of making incompatible promises? And does it not make it difficult for businesses and others to decipher where you actually stand on public spending? Thank you.
Helen, thank you very much. A number of points to make in response for that. Yes, we do want to be seen as fiscally responsible, and that's why we set out our 5 fiscal rules at conference when Rachel Reeves gave her speech. And I think that we're one of the earliest oppositions ever to set out fiscal rules so far from an election. Very clear rules about long-term borrowing and about day-to-day spending. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't invest the right amount at the right time in the right things. And I'm convinced that you cannot have the next generation of jobs if you don't invest in relation to the climate crisis. And that's why the climate investment pledge of £28 billion a year to 2030 is so important, because together the government and businesses can use that investment to reap the benefits of the next generation of jobs. So, yes, we need fiscal rules. Yes, we need to be disciplined. There will be nothing in the next Labour manifesto which is not fully costed according to the fiscal rules we've set out already. So, yes, we will be fiscally responsible. That starts with rules set out so you can see them this far ahead before an election, and being absolutely clear what we will spend on, but equally absolutely clear what we won't spend on. Thank you very much. I think next we're going to Peter Walker, who we have in person. Peter.
Oh, hi. Sorry, there's a microphone there. Hi, from the Guardian. I was actually going to ask the question that Sky just asked, so I'll ask a couple of things which are not directly related to what you said now. On small boats, there's a Labour-instigated urgent question coming up in the Commons. Can I just ask, in terms of short-term policy, what would Labour do different to what the government is doing now? And also on migration and the boats, given the fact that asylum seeker numbers are not necessarily rising at the moment, is there a danger you're playing into this narrative of it's being a crisis when it's not necessarily an actual crisis? And then a second quick question, if I could.
I think you're going to.
On second jobs, I know you said that for MPs you'd rule out almost all second jobs by a certain small number, but it turns out that some MPs are also putting their second job earnings through private companies to reduce the amount of tax that they pay. If any Labour MPs do that, do you think they should stop?
The answer to the second question is very easy. Yes, absolutely. The whole point of the registration and declaration scheme in Parliament is that everybody, yourselves included, can see transparently what is happening in relation to any income, any gifts or donations. On the small boats, the first thing I'd say is there is no short-term solution that isn't also a long-term solution. And one of the frustrations I have in this is that you've got a government that constantly says what it's going to do in relation to the boats in the Channel, whilst at the same time cutting overseas aid upstream. And if you don't deal with this issue internationally before it arises as a problem on the northern coast of France, you will never be able to tackle it effectively. I'm afraid it's the medium and the long term that really matters here. In the short term, of course, stronger agreements with France need to be hatched, but there is no short-term solution that equates to or could possibly replace the medium-term and the long-term solution, which is upstream in relation to why people are moving in the first place. And for the international community, they see the United Kingdom government now saying a lot of things about global Britain, but at the same time cutting down on the investment and the money it's actually spending in other countries upstream to prevent some of these very, very predictable outcomes. Thank you, Peter. I think, Lord Balamory, I'm now coming to join you before we take more questions.
Thank you very much, Sir Keir. That was a really wide-ranging speech, and we appreciate the sentiments and the frankness that you've expressed. What we're going to do is now have a short discussion, and then could you be prepared? We should have some time to take a few questions from the audience before we conclude the session.
Yes, of course.
If you're happy.
Yep.
Marvellous. So the first thing I'd like to just ask you about, just expanding what you've said. I mean, you've seen the title there, 2021 Annual Conference, Seize the Moment. I mean, Seize the Moment is this strategy that we've prepared for the next decade of the opportunity for our economy that the CBI sees for the next decade. We're in an inflection point at the moment in our history, and it requires government, business to work together. So how would you assess, just expanding what you said, where we are today as an economy and where you see this vision for the next 10 years if you were able to lead things?
Yeah, what I said in my speech and what I'd say in answer to that question is my assessment of our economy is that we've got this weakness in growth. And I'm very glad we'll get to a Q&A with the audience, because I obviously want to hear what other people have to say. But at the moment, I think the single biggest issue facing us is that we've got a high tax, a very high tax economy a high-price economy driven, amongst other things, by inflation, but at the same time low growth. And that combination of high tax, high prices and low growth is a real problem area. As I said a moment ago, I was struck by the Prime Minister, I think, saying this morning that he sees the productivity problem as something that's arisen because of COVID. I think he's completely wrong about that. And I think that if we don't have some basic honesty about that, we risk going down the wrong track, because if anybody thinks that the productivity issue is simply something of the last 18 months to 2 years, then I think we are going to make some fundamental errors. And that's why I think that the route forward here is, firstly, long-term. I can't emphasise this enough. If we could shift the sort of timescale that we're talking about in the economy and with businesses from broadly 3 years to 10 years, so that longer-term investment is unlocked, it would make a world of difference, whether that's to skills, investment in technology of the future, the infrastructure that needs to go around it, make a huge, huge difference. The time frame needs to shift, and government and business need to work together on that. I think an incoming Labour government would say, what are the incentives that we could put in place for businesses to move to this longer-term model? I know many businesses want to move to that longer-term model, and many businesses say to me, that provides us not just with the research, the development, the skills, but also just the certainty to actually get the inward investment that we need. I was really struck when I went to Scotland to one of the big wind farms up there, that nearly all the wind turbines were built outside of the United Kingdom. And when I said, well, why on earth is that? Since we've got manufacturing skills, we could certainly build these wind turbines. The answer was, we haven't had an industrial strategy that's been certain enough to get the investment in to do it. And that's just one example. So I think, firstly, analyse the problem honestly, objectively and carefully, and then put in place a long-term strategy that does invest in the right way, and it's got to be a partnership between government and business. I think a grown-up partnership where the government rightly sets the mission, if you like, what it is that we need to achieve, and climate crisis and climate change driven change would be an example of that. But then we empower business to work to that in conjunction with government, right? And this is where, for me, it's very important to say on behalf of the Labour Party, what I envisage is that we work with business. We don't do things to business. We work with business. And the CBI has said to me on numerous occasions that, there's always more than one way, Keir, of achieving a particular outcome, and we should work together on what that could be. But the first thing is analyse the problem honestly. And if anybody, in my view, starts from the proposition that productivity is only a problem of the last 2 years, then we've got a problem.
Well, you said just now high tax. I mean, we've got the highest tax burden in 70 years at the moment. Now, historically, a business would always be a little concerned that a Labour government in the past would put taxes up and would tax more. But when you look back, the Gordon Brown, Tony Blair government, their tax rates were really friendly and very low. I mean, the corporation tax we had, the business entrepreneurs relief, a 40% top rate. So where would you stand on that?
Well, just before we finish that description, we also had much bigger growth under the last Labour government, much bigger than we've had in the last decade, even when you take into account the economic crisis that we had in 2008. And so it's very important to contrast that government of 13 years, Labour government, with what we've had in the last 11 years. So far as tax is concerned, I'd say two things about that. The first is the reason we oppose the government's tax rises now is because business said to us, as we come out of the pandemic and we are trying to get back on our feet, the last thing we need now is to be held back by tax. So I didn't hear businesses saying to me, we don't want to pay our fair share, we don't accept there should ever be a penny more. But they were saying there's a timing issue here that really matters. And you have to give us the chance to get back in the game and to invest in the way forward. So there's a timing issue on tax. The other thing I think is very important is that whatever tax is raised, it's done in a fair way. And this is where I would criticise the national insurance tax that the government is introducing, because it's a tax on jobs, which is about the last place you want a tax, and we would have a sort of broader shoulder approach to that. The second thing, I think, is that taxes such as business rates have got to be scrapped. And we've been talking about this I don't think there's ever a conversation I've had with business that hasn't involved analysis of the problem with business rates and the difference it would make, particularly for smaller businesses, start-up businesses. And therefore, you know, it's a question of taxing fairly, but also being clear as to what tax you want to reform. So I would disagree with the government on the timing of their tax rises, on the people that they're hitting, which is a jobs tax which hits businesses and it hits people in jobs, and then say the government has walked around the business rates issue, promising many things for a very long time. It still is tinkering around the edges, and I think it was very important for us in our conference speech to be able to say with boldness that we will freeze, reduce and then get rid of business rates. Very, very important. And I think it was pretty warmly received by the CBI and other business groups for obvious reasons.
We've been saying for years at CBI that business rates need to be reformed comprehensively.
Yeah.
I mean, they're several times, 4 times higher than Germany, 3 times higher than the OECD average, so they need to be reformed. So that's very good to hear. And national insurance, I mean, it's not 1.25%, it's 2.5%.
Yeah.
1.25 on employers, 1.25 on employees.
Yeah.
You mentioned investment. Do you think, for example, what would you do? Would you think things like the super deduction is a good way of incentivizing investment? Would you do similar? How much further would you go?
Well, I think the super deduction does some of the work, but I don't think it does a lot of the work when it comes to investment. I think that this is where we need a partnership and we need a match. Let me give one example. The steel industry in this country is in trouble, has been in trouble for quite a long time, and at the moment is obviously facing very high energy costs because it's energy intensive. But over the long term, if we want steel to survive, and we do, then we have to move to a way of producing steel that is consistent with our obligations in relation to the climate. That can't be done without investment. The government suggested a few £100 million. I don't think that's enough. So what we would say, and this is the partnership that I'm talking about with business, is that we've costed that. We think that would cost about £6 billion. And we think that the government should put in £3 billion and the private sector should put in £3 million in a combined effort to ensure that we do transition with steel. So we do actually have a steel industry in the future, because this goes back to one of my central points. If you don't have a long-term strategy and long-term thinking, we'll end up with a situation that none of us want, which is the further decline of our steel sector. And one of my frustrations with this government is they've been in power now for 11 years and we haven't got any long-term thinking. There was an industrial strategy that Theresa May introduced in 2017. Now, I had my criticisms of it, but it was an industrial strategy. That's now gone. And what we've got in its place, I don't think, is a strategy. And the idea that you can level up the regions without a long-term industrial strategy as part of the answer just defeats me, I'm afraid.
Well, we've just announced, Tony Danker, the Thriving Regions.
Yeah. I thought the speech was very, very good this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to be working on that and in clusters and levelling up. Now, there's no, I think everyone would admit that the relationship between business and the Labour Party has been so much improved since you've taken over as leader. And with Rachel Reeves as well, we have a very good working relationship with Ed Miliband. Could you just expand? Is this, the thinking behind? We're very happy with this.
Yeah, look, I'm glad that you say that because we have reset. I think we've got much closer relations with business, and by that I mean with business organisations like the CBI, but also with individual businesses. And wherever we go around the country, we talk to businesses, large and small, and doing all sorts of different things. And one of the things that I find frustrating, so you will find doubly frustrating, is politicians who say, well, I know about business, I used to run this, or I used to work in that sector. As you know better than I, all businesses and all sectors are actually different. with different push and pull factors, different things, and you can't properly understand business without that constant dialogue. And that's what we've been building very, very tightly. Regular meetings now with the CBI, which are very frank and honest, as you would expect. But also, politically, being clear that we're not just pro-business as two words. We actually believe in business as a force for good in itself. And I think that sometimes, if I may say so, our party has come across as thinking that business is to be tolerated in some way, but not to be celebrated as a good in itself. And I think that mindset has changed under my leadership and under Rachel Reeves. And I think that sets up the sort of active, supportive relationship that we need going forward as we tackle the very many problems. You know, we're coming out of COVID, we're dealing with Brexit, and I don't think the government is making Brexit work, but we've got to make it work. And we've got the climate crisis, which forces us to change, but together it can be a huge opportunity, but it's got to be done together.
I think you sort of, the question I was going to ask you is good business and good government are partners. You said this is something, I'm quoting you.
Yeah, I fundamentally believe this, that you need government, and it is the role of government to set out the mission or the framework, if you like, and we shouldn't shy away from that. It is quite right for the elected government to say this is the framework, this is the mission, this is what we're trying to achieve, but to work alongside business and say, how do we empower you to achieve that? And that is the sort of active partnership that I started on this discussion in my CBI speech last year, actually, and then it went through various other speeches into my conference speech. But it's that combination, it's that partnership that I think that we can make to work.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the government creating the environment for business to flourish.
Yes.
Marvellous. May I now open it up?
Yes, please.
So we'll have time for just a few questions. And before going any further, I want to thank Accenture and Hayes, our main sponsors, for their sponsorship of this Pan-UK conference. And may I just take some questions? I think Gordon, our host, would like to ask a question.
I actually don't have a question.
You don't have a question? But you see, out of politeness, I went to you first as our host, and it gives me an opportunity to once again thank you for hosting us. So if you could... Yes?
I do have one question. Yes, my name is Gordon, and I'm the CEO of Advanced. So, Keir, you talked about the growth of the last Labour sort of government over that 13 years. Was there not a bit of an issue that we ended up with quite a fiscal deficit at the end of it? So, yes, there was growth, but was it not overfueled?
Well, you know, there was a global crash in 2008, which wasn't the fault of the Labour government here, although others tried to make it the fault of Labour. It was very obviously a global issue. Anybody who's looked at, as you will have done, looked at the analysis of how that unfolded in 07, 08 and into 09 will see that it was anything but a failure of the last Labour government. It was a global issue. I would also say, in fairness, that Gordon Brown probably did more or as much as any global leader to limit the damage of this global crash. Actually, contrast his response to the 08 crash, where he was literally on the phone around the world talking to world leaders to pull them together to limit the extent of this global damage, with the Prime Minister on climate crisis. What we needed 2 weeks ago in COP was a truly international leader pulling people together. By that I mean the big emitters, who I don't think have committed enough at COP 26, but also the developing countries that needed that partnership. So, and just looking at those growth figures, that 13-year Labour government had much better growth than we've had in the last 11 years. And I think that is a large part of the reason we're in the difficult position we are in now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Time for a couple more, and if you could just give your name and the organisation, please, and I'll take a question there. Thank you.
Hi, it's Marshall. I work here at Advanced as well. I know that in areas like Birmingham, there's a lot of digital poverty, and that leads to a lack of digital skills being developed as well. I know Advanced started to implement a non-biased recruitment process about 5 years ago to kind of aid you in your levelling up agenda. I just wanted to know what could be done to encourage UK PLCs to take a similar approach and try and bridge that gap.
Yeah, well, there are two parts to that question, so let me try and deal with both of them. As far as recruitment is concerned, Gordon and others walk me around, so I think I understand a little bit of the recruitment approach here, which is much less to do with the CV and looking at the skills that somebody, or the potential skills that somebody might need. And I'm very interested in that, and that's why I said that in my speech in relation to skills, that the businesses are telling me the skills they need are skills like communication, about working in a team, the skills that are transferable, if you like, across different sectors, but not narrow and technical in that sense. And the reason that I want to set up a council to look at skills is because I genuinely think that we have too many young people coming out of education without the skills they need for the businesses that they're likely to be working in. Now, this may vary regionally because there are different businesses with different needs, but at the moment, there's a massive mismatch between young people and the skills that businesses say they need. So I'm very interested in the model that's operating here. I'll look at it more closely. But ever since my first day as Shadow Immigration Secretary, businesses have said to me the problem is skills. Where, I was very struck going around the country that whatever the size of the company, whatever they were doing, and wherever they were, when I asked, well, what's the single biggest inhibitor of your success over the next 5 to 10 years, almost all of them said it's skills, and we're still in that space now. So I'm very interested in this question of recruitment and how we do it in a fair way, but also a way that actually looks at the skills that might be needed. In relation to the second part of your question, which is on digital, again, I'm concerned about how far we are behind other countries when it comes to digital skills in this country. It is obviously the future. We don't put enough emphasis on it at schools and in our colleges, and we need to. Some of that is about digital poverty, of course, and we were pushing the government hard during the pandemic when obviously so many more young people had to go online. But it is also being clear that skills is part of the future. That's why this council, and I'd like you all to play a part in this council that David Blunkett will lead for me, is going to be focused on that question, which is how to ensure that young people come out of education ready for life and ready for business, because I see that as one of the huge issues of the 21st century. And we have been talking about it for a very long time, a bit like the business rates. We think we've identified the problem. Now we've got to actually identify what we're going to do to make a material difference to it. So thank you very much for your question.
And Lord David Blunkett is a colleague of mine in the House of Lords and highly respected, very active.
Strong views.
Yeah.
But he would love you all to contribute. You will all have different things to say. This is where it's very important for all of us to recognise that different sectors will have different issues when it comes to skills. I also think that maybe, this is just a regional element to this. Do we have the skills that we need for particular regions rather than just a sort of national skill set? That's where coming back to this link between schools and business I find so important. So we're having, because if you want to know what skills you need in the local economy, ask your local businesses, I would say, is a pretty good starting place. The other thing I'm very keen on, and I know a number of you do this, is I've got in my constituency, and it happens everywhere, no end of children who have no real exposure to business, and therefore they don't know that they aspire to do what your business does, because they don't know anything about it, and because nobody in their immediate circle knows anything about it, they don't even think that it's what they might want to do. And the excitement you can get from young children or young people by having a business there that says we do this, and you sort of see the wide-eyed, the real school thing, wide-eyed young people actually simply being introduced to this is what we do in our business. Hugely important raises their aspiration and then gives a much better talent pipe coming into business.
That's absolutely spot on. We need to get businesses and schools much more together. I still remember as an 11-year-old my field visit to a pencil factory. I can picture it talking to you now. So it made quite an impact on, but I still love beer factories the best. Now, we have time for one last question. I think the mic is in that area. Gentleman here, please.
Hi, morning. I'm Nick Katecha, Chairman of Morningside Pharmaceuticals. We manufacture generic medicines. You talked a lot about productivity, Sir Keir, and some of the levers through infrastructure, skills inclusivity, global trade, which is very much in line with the CBI Seize the Moment initiative. But what can we do specifically for our regions? What support, in practical terms, can you provide the Midlands and all of our fantastic regions to succeed and become thriving regions?
Well, I think you need a regional strategy. And this is why I'm so critical of government for not having an industrial strategy. There needs to be a regional strategy because in each region, and you can argue about what the size of the region should be, we need a long-term plan. We need resource and clarity about that resource going in over a period of time that makes sense for business to invest. We need infrastructure and we need skills, and I think we actually need decision-making closer to the region. Amongst the criticisms I've got of the government ripping up its promises on HS2 and the Northern Powerhouse Rail is, one, of course, on one level it's about capacity and time it takes to get from A to B, but it's fundamentally about investment. I was in Bradford on Thursday when the announcement was made, and the sense of disappointment that what was thought to be a huge investment, and they knew that meant jobs, that meant businesses, that meant a coherent regional plan, had just been ripped up. So as much as people are saying, well, I'm still on these lousy trains that are taking forever to get from Leeds to Bradford or whatever, it was also the huge disappointment. This was the chance to regionally do what was necessary. And the other is you've got to involve, I think, regional leaders and regional businesses in this. I mean, forget the days, if when we get the next Labour government, of politicians sitting in Whitehall and coming up with plans for Birmingham or the West Midlands or Yorkshire or any other regions. It's got to be done in the regions. So a strategic plan, bringing all the elements together. I am interested in this question of whether skills should be part of that and recognising different skills in different areas. I don't have a fixed view on that, but I can see a powerful argument for it. Regional plan, strategic plan, the opposite, frankly, of we've got at the moment, which gives a degree of certainty to businesses. I mean, in a sense, businesses want government to invest in the right part of their sector, the right business, but they also just want the certainty to allow other investment to work better because the environment is set in a way that everybody understands. And therefore, I think the answer is to have those regional plans, and not to have an industrial strategy just seems to be wrong-headed. As I say, I did have my criticisms of Theresa May's industrial strategy, but at least she knew you needed an industrial strategy and what it might have it. And I've still not understood this government coming on and ripping it up because now, we're in a place where there just isn't that coherent framework. And you don't need me to say this. It makes it more difficult for businesses because once you take the certainty away, then all of the decisions you have to make are that much more difficult.
Thank you for the question, Nick. Mr. Keir, we're almost out of time, so any concluding remarks before I make some?
Well, first thing is, it is really fantastic to see you all in person. I've been leader of the Labour Party for 18 months or so, and for most of that time, we've been in restrictions of one sort or of another. And it was only just, I think, 5 or 6 weeks ago at our party conference that I actually had the chance to address an audience, a live audience of real people, for the first time. So it's absolutely fantastic to be here, to have the opportunity to have the discussion we've had. I hope my main points have come through as to what I think are some of the answers to the challenges ahead. But also how we do it together, because what is the problem is the first thing, and then the second is how we're going to solve it, and that is having the ideas to solve it, but also a proper understanding of how business and government can work together. I'm convinced this can be done, by the way. I think it's very exciting if we can pull it off. But it's been a great opportunity to share that and to hear your challenge, and this is only the beginning of the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, all of you.
Well, thank you, Sir Keir. Thank you for your speech. Thank you for taking the questions from the press. Thank you for our discussion. And thank you for taking the questions from the floor. And if I just conclude by just picking out one or two things that you said in your speech that really resonated. I mean, you went right back to 1965 to our annual report about being dynamic and competitive. You talked about a contract together between business and government, the productivity challenge, investing in people, the industrial strategy, which you've touched on many times, labour shortages, which we're all suffering from at the moment, making Brexit work. And you're giving specific examples about that, and about our world-class financial services, our professional services, of which you're a great example yourself. And the battle for talent is going to be one of the defining issues of the 21st century. So skills came through, creativity, which was music to my ears, your new Council for Skills Advisors, highlighting the drop in investment in further education and sixth form since 2010, in startups, business rates reform, incentivizing investment, and the climate crisis being an opportunity to create jobs as well. And you concluded by talking about our title, the CBI industry, and your title, labour. And I love the way you spoke about business as a force for good. And during this pandemic, that's come out more and more and more. And finally, you talked about a government's role being in creating the environment for business to flourish. So it's been amazing. I think a huge, huge round of applause for Sir Keir Starmer,
Thank you very
Leader
much.
of the Opposition,
Thank you.
Leader of Labour Party.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Nice to see you. Have you had anything?
Please.